So let's get into the time where I met this badass bitch, this fine-ass bitch, out in the Galleria Mall in Dallas. So you know how I do, man. Just follow the story, man. So anyway, one day I was chilling, you know what I mean, just doing me. I get a call from Farago. Now, I haven't seen Farago in a minute because, Farago started dealing with this younger girl in her mid-20s, you know what I mean? So, Farago was busy like he was just nose open, all in love with some young girl, you know what I mean? That he done met and fell in love with, you know what I'm saying? Like, he would post pictures of her but never show her face. He would show her from, like, back, from the neck down. You might see a picture of Farago with, like, her hand, like, rubbing his beard. Like, he never posted who this girl was for some reason, like, but he was in love with this young girl, you know, that was in her mid-20s. So I get a call from Farago. I'm like, what up, OG? I'm like, yeah, I ain't seen you in a while, man, since you've been booed up. What's good with you? Farago was like, yeah, man, I just, been chilling, just doing me, living life, and then, so I'm asking him, I'm like, yeah, man, I see you, you all in love now, plus 88 told me you dating some young girl, some young thing, and I already know that's like 25 years old. Well, like, what's up with that? And I'm like, what's good with you? He was like, yeah, he was like, she young, but she real mature. He said she got her head on right. You know what I mean? She runs multiple businesses, He was like, she really makes him happy, makes him feel like he's, young again, you know what I mean? Like, she rejuvenates him, you know what I mean? I'm like, that's good, I was like, you seem like you happy, Pops, like, he was like, yeah, man. I was like, but when? I was like, man, we ain't see you in a minute. I was like, we don't do fight nights no more. We don't hang out really, you know what I mean? We don't do, and that's when Farago was like, yeah, he said, that's why I'm calling you. And let you know, I'm gonna have a poker night, where, we could play poker, me, Platinum Flame, rest of the crew. You know what I mean? So I'm like, he asked me, was I down to come through? I'm like, yeah, I swing by. He was like, good, because he said, I think his sister died, you know what I mean? Which is 88's aunt. I think she just passed. So he was like that, that made him, appreciate family and friends more. Because he was like, yo, you just never know when you're gonna go. So he was like, even though he's in love and, he realized he gotta also make time for his family and friends. So I'm like, yeah, for sure. So he said he inviting everybody to his house to come play poker, cheer, whatever. Alright, cool. So, some times go around, I go over to Farago house on a Friday. This is, poker night. So of course it's me, Platinum Flame. Farago's there. 88's there. 88's sister, Sherry, is there. A bunch of other people who know from the crew. So, we playing poker, we playing poker. We playing poker, you know what I mean? We got the music playing loud. This guy, that 88 was now dating named Chance, the one that be doing all the comedy skits about having STDs and shit. He was dead, you know what I mean? Cracking jokes and shit, talking loud, music blasting, you know what I'm saying? 88 and her sister Sherry, which is also Farago's daughter, they in the kitchen, you know what I mean? Cooking up some of, Farago's favorites, even though they had pizzas piled up to the ceiling that they done ordered, you know what I mean? But he also likes certain things with his shit, so as me, Platinum Flame, Farago, Biggest, and Chance were all sitting at the round table playing poker, and 88 and Sherry coming back and forth bringing, refreshments. We playing poker, so, Platinum, like, he was like, so what's good over here? We hear you got a young girl, that you dating. So he was like, yeah, he said, it's a girl that, that he met when he was out and about, and that, he feels she the one. He was like that, she makes him happy, And then that's when 88 was like, that girl is young enough to be your daughter, hell, your granddaughter. The girl, she was like, the girl is like 25 years old, you know what I mean? And he was like, age ain't nothing but a number. He was like, shit, she legal, you know what I mean? He was like, I ain't doing no R. Kelly shit. And then that's when Sherry, was shaking her head and was like, well, when we gonna meet her? He was like, real soon. He was like, real soon because, he was like, he said real soon. And then that's when he looked at me. He's like, your fella's gonna, have to do some shopping for me, buy me some gifts and, make sure y'all book some strippers real soon. So I'm putting two to two together. I'm like, buy you gifts and strippers. I'm like, Farago, what you trying to say? Like, you engaged, you're about to get married. He just smiled and was like, yeah. And then that's when we all was like in shock. 88 was like, what? And then that's when Sherry was like, daddy. And then that's when he was like, yeah, man. He was like, I'm in love. And then that's when 88 asked her about his ex-girlfriend, some white lady. I forgot the name. She asked him about the white. He was like, hey, man, some things just come to an end, best friends become strangers. He was like, but this girl makes me happy. So that's when 88 said, well, if you engaged, then y'all about to get married. He was like, when we gonna meet her? He was like, soon. So that's when I said, when's the big date? And then that's when Farago said, August 23rd. And that's when we all looked at, I said August 23rd. I'm like, it's July. He was like, yeah, I know. He was like, so like I said, y'all better start shopping for my gifts and ordering the strippers. Smoking his cigar, laughing. That's where 88 just shook her head and walked away. And Shetby like, what? He was like, yeah, man. And he's like, August 23rd is a big day. We gonna get married on that day. I'm inviting everybody here and other family and friends. He was like, yo, I just lost my sister, which is, 88's aunt. She just passed away. I'm just gonna live my life to the fullest, you know what I mean? And that's when we was like, all right, man, you know what I mean? I was like, and that's when I said to Farago, I said, congratulations. If you happy, I'm happy. And that's when, Flame was like, facts. And he was like, if you happy, Farago, I'm happy for you. So we all, congratulated him. And Sherry and 88 wasn't having it. It was just like, he just walked away and, was like, whatever, right? So, for the rest of the night, we played poker, cracked jokes, listened to good music, had a good time. I could kind of tell 88 and Sherry was kind of upset that not only Farago was dating a young woman that was younger than them, because, 88 and Sherry like in their 30s, Farago's new girlfriend is in her 20s. So they was upset about that. Plus, like I said, Farago's sister passed away, which was 88 aunt, so they was kind of like, feeling some kind of way. So cool. So being that Farago said that the wedding was supposed to be August 23rd and it's already July, the next day, me, Platinum, and Flame, we go out to the Galleria Mall in Dallas, so, we shopping for Farago. We like, well, fuck it, we might as well get the, to shop it out the way, because, Farago, is not only our boss, but we fuck with Farago, like, he's the big homie, so we shopping, we in the Galleria in Dallas, Platinum, bought him something, fucking Flame bought Farago something, so I already knew what I wanted to get Farago. I wanted to get him a Rolex watch, because me and Farago always been close, and he always treated me and always said that I was like the son he always wanted, being that we both originally from New York, and, he sees a lot of himself in me, so I'm like, well, I'm gonna, go, buy, Farago a watch, a Rolex, and so that's what it was like, damn, we spending big money. I'm like, yeah, man, I love Farago, man, that's like, that's, the big homie, man. Farago really, set a nigga straight when I got out here. Like, he really put, he's the reason why I'm getting, money. He's the reason why we all getting money. That's when, Flame was like facts and Clayton was like true. So we go into this jewelry store that's at the Galleria, that's in the Galleria in the mall in Dallas, So as we walk in, it's this badass motherfucking chick in there, bad light-skin joint, light-skin joint, with blondish type hair. Blonde hair, light-skin joint, finer than a motherfucker, like, she had on like a blouse, like a shirt, tight-ass skirt, business skirt, and you could see the curves, even though she was dressed professionally, you could just see the curves, and she had on some heels, like, god damn, you know what I mean? So she's in there. There's a couple other people in there. No, even though I could tell, like, this jewelry store is owned by somebody else. She's running it. She's like the top. So as we walk in, she's like, hey, how you gentlemen doing today? I'm like, I'm fine. So me and, the lady was asking me, well, I told her, well, I got like a uncle type, like a, father-in-law, that's getting married, and I want to, buy him a Rolex watch. She was like, oh, congratulations. And then, I seen on her tag, it said Kendra, on her name tag, it said Kendra. So I said, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. And she was like, oh, she was like, I'm Kendra. And she, pointed to the name tag, and I'm like, yeah, I'm Tony. And so we locked eyes for a second. So, so she's showing me the different watches, and I asked, for a particular Rolex, I was saying. I asked her about the presidential Rolex, and she said, that's a good choice. So then she showed me different presidential Rolexes, and I'm like, that one right there. So she pulled it out, she put it on my wrist, I'm looking at it, Flame and Platinum looking at it, they're like, yeah, you know what I mean? They was like, yeah, that's nice. So I'm like, how much is, this? She was like, a little over 9K, you know what I mean? But like 10K will cover everything. And that's when Flame said, whoo, Flame, he walked off like, and Platinum like, damn. So I'm like 10, I was like a little over 9K, 10K would come. I'm like, cool. I'm like, wrap it up. So then that's when I pulled out my platinum credit card, and that really, she was kind of taken back. And then, she was like kind of taken back, kind of shocked that, I had a platinum credit card. She see me, she see the tattoos, the braids. So, like, always, she asked me, was I like an artist, a rapper or something? Like, nah, I ain't a rapper. I was like, I'm just, I'm a businessman, you know what I mean? I'm an entrepreneur, you know what I mean? And that's when Platinum and Flame standing there, smiling and laughing. She was like, oh, okay. So she, she asked for my ID, I gave her my ID and shit. But she was like, oh, cause on the ID is the address where my condo is. And she was like, oh, I know this area. She was like, nice area. I'm like, yeah. So that's when, we locked eyes again. So, we go through everything. I purchased the watch, for Farrago or whatever. So, of course she, rings everything up. She gives me, a receipt. You know what I mean? So I'm like, nice meeting you. Kendra, she was like, likewise. She was like, likewise. So, as we shook hands, you know what I mean? I said, I definitely will be shopping here again. Hopefully this is not the last time I see you. She said, I'm sure it won't be. So as, I'm walking away, I look at the receipt, to make sure I wasn't overcharged. And when I looked in the back of the receipt, it had her name, her number. So when I looked back, she smiled. And then that's when I smiled. I'm like, gave her a wink or whatever. She winked back. So I'm like, cool. So, so of course, I showed Platinum and Flame, the number in the back. They're like, oh shit. And then Platinum again was like, yo, Tony, I don't know how you do it, my nigga. How, like, hey man, is it not on you as Uno will always say, I mean, he was like, Flame like facts. So, we did a little more shopping, for ourselves and, picked, a few things up here and there, you know what I mean? And, as, we was leaving the mall and I got in the car, I text, Kendra, my number, let her know, hey, this is Tony. I was just in the store. I just bought the, presidential watch. So that's when she texted me back. It was like, okay, she said she gonna store my number and to give her a call, like around 8 o'clock, that's when they close up around 8. Like 8, 9, that's when they close up. She can't really, talk on the phone like that right now because she's, she's, working or whatever. Cool. So, me, Platinum, Flame go, throughout our day. Then boom, they go on their way, I go on my way. So around 8 o'clock is when I called her phone, so she answered, you know what I mean? And, I could tell she got me on the Bluetooth because I could hear, she's closing up the store and there's people, like other people that was, it was like, four other people that was in the store working when she was working, so I could tell they closing up. And, that's when we started the conversation, you know what I mean? And I asked her, I'm like, yo, where you originally from? For she asked me where I was from, I'll say, I'm born and raised in New York. Out here in Dallas getting money, whatever, whatever. Cool, I asked her where she from. She said she's born and raised in West Virginia. You know what I mean? So I'm like, wow. You know what I mean? And she, also told me that, she's out here in Dallas because, she helping run the store in Dallas, because her boss, who's like, a Hindu, you know what I mean? She's been working with this particular Hindu family for like 5 years, you know what I mean? She's been working with them for 5 years, and every time they open up a store, or they need like, the store to run a certain way, they bring her in, you know what I mean? She's like they number one go-to. So she says, she's been in Dallas, you know what I mean? Not that long, and, she's been, running the store, you know what I mean? But she says she's born and raised in West Virginia, you know what I mean? And I'm like, wow, and then that's what I said, thinking out loud, I said, wow, Kendra from West Virginia. I said, girl, well, I love to stick something in you. Then that's what she said, what? She started laughing. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud. She was like, it's okay. She was like, I'm kind of thinking the same thing. I said, what? She was like, yeah, she was like that. Not only she's, helping run the store, you know what I mean, for this particular family that she's been working for 5 years, but she's also house sitting because, the family, they got businesses all over. So, they got stores in Dubai and India and New York and LA, and now they got this spot in Dallas. So she said, yeah, she's house sitting for them. She's over at Highland Park. So I'm like, Highland Park. I'm like, damn, that's where all them expensive houses is at. She was like, exactly. She was like, that's why she's house sitting, you know what I mean? Why they take care of business and like, they like I said, they trust her, you know what I mean? She's like the one black, friend slash, employee that they trust, you know what I mean? So I'm like, okay. So she was like that I could come over there and see her, you know what I mean, over at Highland Park, she gave me the address and shit. She said, it's like around 8 now, they closing. She said, give her to like, maybe like 10 o'clock. So cool, so we set it up. So now it gets around the time, I slide over, to Highland Park, pull up to this big ass motherfucking house, the shit look like a castle, big ass fucking house and shit, big ass gates and shit. I call us, she opened up the gate, you know what I mean? And I pull up, into the driveway, and then, she's, directed me, telling me, go here, go there. So as I, walk in the door, she left the door open. So when I open the door and I walk in, the lights is dim, and then, I could hear like music playing a little bit. And then when I went towards the living room, when I tell you this girl was butt-ass naked, legs sprayed, you know what I mean, like an eagle. I'm like, oh, shit, she's just letting, laying there, legs sprayed, you know what I mean? So I'm like, oh, shit, so I automatically started taking off my clothes, got naked, you know what I mean, grabbed the condoms out of my, pocket, and I went and walked towards the couch. This couch was like the size of a king-size bed, like, big-ass couch. So, of course, we doing our thing, kissing, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Eating the pussy, you know what I mean? Front to back, you know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Boom, put the condom on, start digging it down, fucking her, hitting it from the back, fucking on the side. Like, I was 10, I ass up all over the couch, you know what I mean? Picked her up in the air. I'm fucking her in the air and shit, you know what I'm saying? Boom. So, I take the condom off, start fucking her face, she's gagging and slaping and choking, slaping and choking, you know what I mean, burping, fucking spit running down her chin onto my balls and on the floor. I'm fucking her face like it's pussy, you know what I mean? Then I just pull my dick out and jerk off, bust all over her fucking face, right? Boom. That was the first round. So, we chilling, talking. So, I'm asking her, like, what's her status? She said, she's dating, but she wanna have fun before, she gets serious, you know what I mean? She's like, she's dating somebody, you know what I mean, that's special, but, she wanna have her fun before it gets serious, you know what I mean? You know? So I'm like, alright, no doubt, no doubt, cool. So, we get it in again, boom, fucking her, doggy style, fucking her, you know what I mean? Even, me took the, dick out, put it in her ass. She took it in her ass like a champ, you know what I mean? She took it all in her ass like Janet Jackson, you know what I mean? Even though she, wincing and crying, I'm fucking all in her ass and shit. Oh my God, you know what I mean? Fucking in the ass to take the dick out her ass, put it in her mouth, choking it, I did this girl dirty. Did this to her all night long, you know what I mean? And then in the morning, got dressed, shower up, got dressed. And so now we trying to plan the next day when we gonna see each other. So, I asked about this date. She said, nah, she gonna be busy. You know what I mean? Doing this, that. Then she asked me about what I'm doing on this day. I'm like, I got it, something to do on that date. And then there was another date. We both was busy on that day. You know what I mean? Because I had to be at, Farago's little, I guess, engagement, celebration, because this is around the time where he's going to introduce us to the girl that he's been, dating. So I'm like, well, I can't go on that date. She couldn't go on that same date. So I'm like, all right, fuck it. So we say, all right, we'll figure it out. Cool. So, I leave. So of course I hit a platinum flame, told him how I, did this girl dirty. I fucked her all in her face, fucked her in her ass. I was like, I did this bitch foul, my nigga. It was no platinum flame laughing, because I got them on three-way. So that's when, we started prepping for Farago's, engagement party. They platinum flame said they got the strippers. You know what I mean? They got the female strippers, you know what I mean? Of course, Uno, hooking us up with, with some, hoes slash, females, that dance and strip and shit. So we like, all right, cool. So now we prepare it for Farago's engagement party, plus he's gonna, introduce 88 and everybody to his new girlfriend and shit, right? Cool. So now comes the day where, it's Farago engagement party, so I'm about to head out to go over to, to Farago, Kendra called me. I'm like, yo, what's up? And she was like, yo, what you doing? I said, well, remember I gotta be, somewhere, what I mean, or whatever, on this day. I was like, I thought you was busy on this day too. She said she is, but she wanted to see me before, she went to where she was going. And she was like, can you swing by the Galleria, you know what I mean? Wait for her in the parking lot. So I'm like, all right, cool. So I get to the Galleria, it's like, maybe like a little, like after 8-ish, you know what I mean, or 9-ish, you know what I mean, because they close up their store around a certain time, like 8-ish, 9-ish or whatever. So she, gets in the car, we talking, she said she just wanted to, get a little quickie, before I, go to, where I'm going. So I'm like, all right, we get in the back seat, boom, we fucking in the back seat, fucking in the back seat, I'm tearing that ass up, boom, beating that pussy down, you know what I'm saying? So I'm like, all right, cool, so we both, get our shit off. So, we planning to get up, later. So she was like, yo, I'm gonna just call you when I'm done doing what I'm doing. I was like, all right, cool. I was like, when I'm done doing what I'm doing, I'm gonna call you. So she goes off. So boom, now I'm heading over, to Farago house, you know what I mean? But I went back to the crib, to wash up because I didn't want to smell like sex. So, I went wash up real quick, you know what I mean? Boom. So now I head over to Farago house, so now we there, you know what I mean? Everybody's there, 88's there, Sherry's there, CB's there, so all three of his daughters is there, you know what I mean? Platinum and Flame is there, I'm there, the rest of the crew's there, Farago's there. So that's when, so we all talking, we all like excited for him. We're like, yeah, man, he just happy, he said he can't wait till August, 23rd get here, he gonna get married and shit. So 88 in the mall, like, asking him, like, you sure you want to do this? Like, this girl half your age. He was like, yeah, man. He was like, I'm in love, man. I'm in love. So I'm like, so where's she at? Platinum Flame, like, where's she at? You know what I mean? Like, he was like, she on her way. So, we, kicking it. And next thing you know, he was like, dig on my baby. So when me and Platinum Flame and 88, and we all look, 88 and Sherry, they already had a look on their face because it was a young girl. But me, Platinum, and Flame, our mouths drop because Kendra walks through the door. Holy shit. So that's when I looked at Platinum and Flame, they looked at me like, so then, so Kendra walks up and she kisses Farago in the mouth and, he tongued her down. I'm like, and then that's when me and Platinum Flame looked at each other and I'm like, so that's when he was like, yo, he was like, hey, buddy, this is, the woman that's been making me happy. This is Kendra. So that he introduced 88. Sherry, he was like, these are my daughters. He was like, this is like my, it's like my son right here. This is Tony. And, we shook hands and said hello, and then she shook Platinum and, Flame, hand. And then she was like, yeah, man, this is her. This is Kendra, this is who makes me happy. And the whole time I'm looking at her, she's looking at me, but we not making it obvious. He was like, yeah, man. He was like, I just can't wait. And she was like, yeah, I can't wait either. So they kissing. I'm like, oh, shit. So as we go on, the strippers come out and dance with Farago. Everybody having fun. Platinum and Flame was like, yo. Flame was like, yo, you got to tell him, fam. You got to tell him, fam, that, I'm like, how I'm going to tell him some shit like that, man. You see how happy to me. He was like, it doesn't matter, man. You got to tell him. So he kept telling me I got to tell him. And I'm like, So as the night go on, everything's going on, the dances, the strippers, the music, everybody enjoying, the engagement party, the shock of, Farago's fiance being Kendra, someone that Alan did dirty, mean them fucked up mouth or ass or pussy and all that shit. And the pressure from Platinum and Flame to tell Farago, I had to step outside, so I step outside. So Kendra also steps outside, to smoke a cigarette. And then that's when she, it's like, yo, you know what I mean? And she was like, yo, you ain't gonna tell him. And I'm like, and I was like, I don't know, man. I feel bad, so she telling me not to tell him, you know what I mean? That, and I'm like, yo, why didn't you tell me? She was like, you never asked. You just asked me, was I dating? And I'm like, fuck. So, we go back inside. So now, Kendra's sitting on, Farago's lap, we all sitting around. So 88 and Sherry is asking her different questions about, yo, why you, want to marry my dad, you know what I mean? What do you have in common? She was like, common. She's like, he makes me happy. We love each other. So that's what 88 said. You ain't like no gold digger, because she was like, my father owns businesses, nightclubs and some more shit. She was like, how we know you ain't a gold digger? And Sherry's like, yeah, like they grilling her. And then that's when, Farago said, don't worry. He was like, all that's going to be taken care of. We got a prenup or whatever. You know what I mean? She gonna sign it. And the 88 said she gonna sign it. And she was like, and then that's when Kenta said, I ain't signed it yet because I've been busy, but I'm gonna sign it. And she was like, yeah. And then he was like, yeah. So, they going back and forth, back and forth. And then, it was kind of getting heated. So that I just stepped in the middle and told, Sherry and 88, won't y'all just, call it a night. Because I could kind of tell 88 was twisted. She was kind of like drunk already because she's already dealing with the death of her aunt. Plus, Farago brought this young girl around, you know what I mean? So I'm like, it was just, chill, for the, So cool, we calmed that down. So, whole time, Platinum and Flame is trying to pressure me to tell Farago. And, it was a few times where I was going to tell him, but then I'm like, nah, because at the time wasn't right. So now it gets to the point, my nigga, we at the motherfucking, at the wedding now. We, everybody got all tuxedos and shit, dressed up. So, Flame is like, yo, you really gonna let this man, you really gonna let Farago go through with this and you ain't gonna tell him. So, when I went to go walk over to Farago to tell him, about me and Kendra or whatever, he's on the phone. He was like, what you mean she, she don't want to do it. She better do it today. What you mean she don't want to do it? So, so I went to, say something, but, he put his finger up like, wait 1 minute. He was like, what you mean? He was like, she better do it today. What the fuck you mean? So he gets off the phone. So right when me and, Farago were about to talk, Sherry walks in and was like, Daddy, You know what I mean? Something happened to where, Farago was like, yo, she ain't signed a motherfucking prenup yet, you know what I mean? And she ain't signed it yet, so he goes in there, cause she was talking to her sisters. And her sisters was like, yo, don't sign it, don't sign the prenup, don't sign the prenup, you know what I mean? Because if you sign it, if this shit don't work out, you're not gonna get nothing. That's what the sisters, that's what Kendra's sisters was saying to her. So that's when, Sherry came out and told, you know what I mean? And then that's when 88 and, and Kendra was kind of arguing, and she'd argue with the sisters. So we hear the arguing, so me and Farago go over there. So Farago gets in there, he kicks 88 out, and Kendra's sister, he kicks them all out because, she hasn't signed this prenup yet. So I'm standing by the door, making sure nobody goes in. And Farago, I could hear him, through the door. They, going back and forth, him and Kendra. He was like, I told you, if you don't sign this shit, I call this shit off right now. I don't give a fuck. And then, they going back and forth, arguing. So he comes out, he storms out. He said, yo, he was like, this shit is dead. He was like, she don't want it. And so 88, like, what happened? And she was like, she don't want to sign the prenup. I told her I'm not playing. If she don't sign that prenup, the wedding's off. She don't want to sign it. Dead this shit. So that's when 88 said, well, you heard it. He was like, ain't no way that she won't sign. Started yelling. You know how 88 is. She yelling like, yup, she don't want to sign the prenup. The wedding is off. And then that's when, Sherry was like, yeah, so now 88 and Sherry, they arguing with with Kendra's sisters. Everybody's getting in between. Farago's like, fuck it. Farago, he just walked off. He took off his, tuxedo jacket. He like, fuck it. He walks off. He leaves. And now we gotta calm 88 and Sherry down and the sisters, and they argued. Everybody arguing. So people escorted Sherry and her sisters out of there. They got them out of there because they're about to get jumped on by, Farago, and his daughters and the whole family. So, and like I said, tensions was already high because, a family member just passed on, so 88 already wanted to beat somebody up, you know what I mean? So they got Kendra and her sisters out of there. So as Farago sitting there upset, like, yo, I told this motherfucking bitch if she ain't signed the prenup, I called this wedding off. She thought I was joking because we here. I don't give a fuck about none of this shit. I don't give a fuck how much I spent on this wedding. If you ain't signing that prenup, so he's going off and off. Next thing you know, I see this white lady walk in. So 88 and Sherry had the shock face. And, and then Farago looked up, he had the shock face, so he stood up. And then, that's when, that's when I knew this was the white, girl that, Farago was dating before Kendra. So, they talking, and she was like, she had to see, Farago, because she's been missing him, and, she heard about him dating a younger girl. And she just had to, she said, how they always ask, speak now, forever hold your peace. She said, she couldn't hold her peace, so that's why she came here. She said she hopes she's not too late. He was like, well, the wedding's been called off because, she ain't want to sign the prenup, and, plus my daughters was always beefing what I saw. He said he took it as a sign. So that's when him and the white lady staring each other in the face, and that's when, she, hugged him. So now Farago and the white lady hugging and kissing, and then that's when, 88 and Sherry was all happy that, they'd rather see him with, with the white girl because they know her. Cool, so, we calm all that down. So as everything calms down and shit, I'm like, yo, man, so now I'm gonna leave because now I ain't gotta tell Farago nothing because he broke up with Kendra. So that's when, Platinum Flame was like, yo, you lucky days when it went the way it did, because if Farago would have found out that you was fucking this bitch, he probably would have had you in a trunk somewhere. And then that's when I laughed. I'm like, yeah. So that's when I shook hands with Platinum Flame. I said, yo, I'm gonna get out of here, but I got a headache being around all this drama. So he was like, I'm with you, fam. So, me, Platinum Flame, we leave him. So I told him, I'm gonna get over with y'all in a minute. So as, Platinum and Flame get in their cars and drive off, I get in my car. You know what I mean? I get in my car. And then I heard a voice say, it took you long enough. So I grabbed my gun, and when I looked back, Kendra's in the, back seat, butt-ass naked. So she was like, asking me if I wanted to get it in before, she goes back to, to Virginia, you know what I mean? Because the, Hindu family's coming back to, So I'm like, shit, why not? So I pulled off real slow while Kendra's in the back seat, playing with that pussy and shit. I pull off, about 2 miles away from, where the wedding was, and I got in the back seat and I tore her ass up one last time, and, that's the story of, the girl in the mall, you know what I mean?